Suzette, thank you so much for coming back.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited to have this discussion today, for sure.
So I thought we'd jump into the sacred and wild self
Hmm.
because it feels there's so much in that is relevant to the whole dark night of the soul process. When did you first become aware that there was this other layer or other kind of self within you?
If I look back, I want to say even as a child, I just felt, and I don't know why that is, but I just have memories. I grew up in a small town, in a small neighborhood, and most summers I was outside the whole summer, running barefoot, climbing trees. I remember getting sap on my feet from the pine trees because we had pine trees, and just my feet would be black. My hands would be black from that pine sap. I had long dark hair and just wild, just free, like catching frogs and swimming and looking at fish. And always I feel like ever since a young child, I felt like I could communicate with dogs and cats. And often tell this story for people who, start to ask. But I remember I would confide in this giant boulder in the woods on the way to school in the bus. I would see it and I would talk to it. I would tell it all the things on my heart. And then we moved when I was in middle school to the ocean. And in front of our house, there was a huge rock, like a big boulder in the middle of the street. So one part of the street went around it one way and the other went around it the other. And from my house, you could see the ocean on the other side. And that rock, again, um, was a place that I first started to meditate at like around 12. And I felt such a kinship with that rock. Um, and when I started the practice of shamanic journeying, they tell you to find a place that meant a lot to you. And that was the place that I went to, that rock. And it's funny, I was researching. I'm a member of the Oneida Tribe of Wisconsin, the Oneida Tribe of Indians of Wisconsin. And they're the people of the Standing Stone. And there's a whole myth around or story or legend or around this stone that the people, that meant a lot to the people. So it was interesting to think that I didn't know about that as a child, but I always had this kinship to rocks and stones. So I want to say that this has been in my blood. It's been in my life, even if it wasn't conscious. But as an adult, I feel like I came back to that remembering of, I don't think it ever went away, but just that remembering of, oh, yeah, that's what it is. It's this sacred wildness. It is who I am at my core, this intuition, you know, we live in this world of constructs, we can't get away from that. And at the same time, I don't have to be ruled by them. That's not my natural self. Like we were talking a little bit before the show, right? I try to honor the truth of my being. Like when I have enough energy to handle certain things or when I have, emotional things that are too big, honoring that. To me, that's that sacred wild self, that remembering of who I am without all these expectations of the constructs and expectations of society as a whole. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. I mean, I really resonate with being drawn to rocks. And so I really get that there's something in the communication with them in whatever way it happens, you had that innate sense of your sacred wild self as a child. What then happened to it? Was it the process of education, or was there a sense of losing it for a while before remembering it? Or
I think, like, probably, I mean, at the same time that to me, that felt like my truest self, it so was the part that was attempted, I feel like, to be kind of, pushed down or away or othered in society. So even at a young age, kind of being steered away from it or ostracized or criticized because of it. Like, and so there was always that feeling of like, I don't know what I'm doing here. Like I don't know how this world works because yeah, so I think starting to feel like I didn't fit in or I didn't know what I was doing or I wasn't adapting or conforming to the expectations of society. So I think I started to, well, I know I started to try to do that. And I've never, like, it's never worked for me. It's never felt like I'm being authentic, whenever I try to do that. So I think that those moments of going into the dark night, of being like really looking at myself and saying, why am I not feeling in alignment? Why am I feeling inauthentic? And having the courage to look at that and face that and ask those questions and wait for the answer. And the answer was like, it's not because something's wrong with you. It's because this world is expecting something out of you that isn't authentic. And it's not just you, it's everybody. It's just some people are better at conforming or adapting to the expectations, and they're the same people that kinda come to me and are like, "Why are you so happy?" Or do you seem so free?" Or so it's interesting, and it's still hard to do sometimes because I question myself a lot. I'm like, but when I come back to that, circle back around and ask myself, like, I would rather be authentic to myself and true to myself than try to fit into a place that I feel is like warped or unhealthy. Um,
I love that word warped. I think there's so much skewed and warped in that whole societal construct of how we're supposed to be. And and I think for me, one of the central things about the Dark Night, especially at the beginning, is that sense of I just can't be that anymore.
right.
And I think the burden, the effort, the tremendous energy it takes to try and fit into that when that is so deeply inauthentic for us is
Yeah,
something that we get to the point we just can't do it anymore.
right. Yeah. And so there is, and as you're saying that, I'm thinking, it's a surrendering to a death, right? Which is also part of that sacred wildness. It's part of what life is allowing parts of yourself to die so that new parts can be reborn or discovered or rediscovered, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you use the word remembering, and I think that's so apt because there's a knowing of that worldness somehow, isn't there? I think even if we don't have actual memories of it, I think there is a deep sort of soul level remembering of not having to be this. And I sometimes get the sense that we remember that from ancient times, that there's something ancient in this sacred wildness.
I agree. I agree. And one of the people or writers that uses that term that really ignited it for me is Tokapa Turner. There's a couple of books that are just amazing. One is Belonging, and the other one is The Dreaming Way. And she uses the term, or she has remembering. So re hyphen membering. So it's, the sense of we're bringing back parts of ourselves that have kind of like been separated. So there's this like, it's almost, it's not just like remembering, like recalling something in the past, but it's also like bringing back parts of ourselves that have kind of been dismembered, right?
That's such a beautiful way to put it because that's exactly what it is, isn't it? It's like I sometimes use the word reclaiming or
Yes.
reintegrating, but remembering really has that sense of bringing back together the members of a community.
Yes. Yeah. And that community in ourselves and that community we see in each other, of like remembering those parts of us. And like you said, those ancient parts of us, it's interesting because I think of that too, that ancient parts, but also like it's almost like the story of the future has already been written. So it almost feels like the past, but maybe it's the future. I don't know if that makes any
Hmm.
sense. Yeah, it's almost like an Ouroboros. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting you say that because a few weeks ago I was having another podcast conversation and I brought up the Ouroboros in a slightly different way. And I
ah,
love what you say about that being, in a sense, in that place, then there's something about time which is very different. And the way that future and past intermingle in that remembering. Often when we're deeply in that place of remembering those lost parts of ourselves, that there's something in that coming back together, which is both moving forward into the future and back into the past at the same time.
yes,
Almost like those moments of healing and remembering are not just happening here and now, but they're also traveling forward and back into past and future.
yes. It really is. It boggles my mind and it's so delicious and I feel it like it's one of those things that like I feel it in my core, but it's hard to describe in a having linear language, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm wondering about this word sacred and we've talked about wildness and I think everybody who's listening to this will have a sense of what we say about connecting with some aspect of nature in some way or what would you say about the sense of sacredness in this?
Yeah. So to me, sacredness is something like set apart, right? It's like it's a part that is kind of a part to honor, a part that is, revered. Um, but it's also set apart. So it's like when you combine like the sacredness and the wildness, like I was saying, yes, we still live in this world that is mostly, organized around these constructs, but being able to kind of come back into ourselves and know that our lives are an altar. Our lives and that wildness is something to reclaim and live, not just idealize, right? But to actually embody. So it becomes almost like a devotion or an honoring, I think. Um, yeah, and sacred also reminds me of sacral, right? That first chakra, that like grounding to the earth, that like really anchoring. So it's almost a foundation that we build upon. Where are we coming from? Are we coming from um, this external world, or are we coming from something that's actually sacred and holy and revered?
I think there's something so beautiful in what you just said, that our lives are an altar. The honoring and the reverence that's implicit in that we can move from the constructs in which, certainly with the constructs of ourselves that we often have, that have usually been imposed on us in some sort of way, conditioning that's come from society or all the other places it comes from, that we can move from this sense of ourselves as being defective in some way, that
Mhm.
we're broken or we don't fit in or whatever it is that those constructs are telling us, into this sense of ourselves, which understands that we're not separate
Mhm.
from that sacredness, though we too are included in that in some way. And I think this is difficult to convey in language, as you just said. And yet, when we begin to have the experience of it, it's really unmistakable that it is sacred. And I was thinking about this before we came on, and thinking, well, how did we come to know that? We've touched on that a little bit.
Mhm.
I think for me, I started to encounter that sense of sacredness more as I was willing to feel more what was here. No, I think there was something about being really willing to enter into whatever experience I was having in the moment, which would
Yes.
sometimes sort of be a portal or open out into this sense of wildness and sacredness.
Mhm. Yes. Yes. And this idea that this sacredness, this sacred wildness it's a reclamation of who we are at our core. And you said that, every moment is like a portal. Um, and honoring whatever that moment is, right? Like sometimes I was also talking to a friend yesterday. He practices Buddhism a lot. And there's this concept of shaking hands with like beautiful monsters, like aspects of ourselves, and just being with them and asking them what they need. And it reminds me of that, like not discounting any part of ourselves, but honoring every part of ourselves, whether it's despair or ecstasy or our sexuality or our creativity or um, our anger. They're all sacred and they're all natural and part of our humanness. And I think that's really important to think about is I think about this like ultimately we're a brain and a spinal column and these nerves, right? Like if you look
Hmm.
at kind of look like an octopus like with our nervous system. And we have these bodies, but they're all it's all about our senses. That's how we receive information about the world around us. Through our eyes, our ears, our nose, our mouth, the intuition. I feel like a lot of that is tapped into our nervous system, the way that we are able to kind of attune to our surroundings and then intuit, what direction to go and I think it even as we attune to that heart space, we connect to everything and we can really, I don't, tell me if I'm getting too far out. But um, that heart space opens, and then we're really able to feel even more, So that sacred wild self is more than just breaking the constructs down, it's also breaking down the constructs of our perception. So our perception goes even further beyond the five senses, and it can really tap us into a larger, deeper knowing, which is the universe or God or source, however you define that. And you said by anchoring into there's just one more, there, I'm on my, I'm on a roll. Um, you said something about the opportunity, or no, you said something about the portal. Every experience is a portal. And I just heard someone, Michael Mead, talk about opportunities. And opportunities are portals. In the word opportunity is port, right? And they are portals. So every opportunity that we have to explore what is in the moment is actually a portal, like you said, into a new experience, into a deeper way of knowing ourselves and each other. Because the deeper we go into ourselves and explore what's going on in me, I can have deeper compassion for you or someone I've never met, if that makes any sense.
Oh, that makes such complete sense. Exactly. I mean, as you say, once we start to touch into this heart space of the wild and sacred self, we're already beyond the personal. We're very much including the personal, as we said, the deep remembering that happens in that, but that remembering encompasses so much more than just the personal, in my experience. And so exactly as you just said, that when we're in that, I think we are in a different kind of sensing and knowing, which is very different from the other kind of knowing that we do, the construct knowing, which of course is useful in its own ways. But I think in this heart space that we're talking about, coming coming to know that kind of knowing, the intelligence of that, I think enables us then to really make use of the opportunities, the portals that everyday experience affords us.
Yes.
And I think it takes a little while to tune into that, the intelligence of that, because even though, yeah, it can be very powerful, it's so different to our usual sense of reason or rationality. And I think then it's natural that we would question that or second guess it until we come to be more familiar with it. We start to trust it more and more and know that what we're sensing in that place is trustable.
Yes. And yes, definitely. I think one of the things that I talk about as well is like there's not just, we're more familiar with our everyday consciousness, right? This waking consciousness where we get up, we eat, we go to work, we come home, this. But even in our everyday consciousness, we're experiencing all these other levels of consciousness that we don't typically acknowledge, like daydreaming, or even when we're like planning something ahead, we're kind of in that daydreaming state. Or um, if we're, a dreaming state. So these, in the way that the world is constructed, right? Constructed, it's like there's consciousness and then there's some other thing, like dreaming, but there's all kinds. And what you were taught, like that heart knowing, that's a form of consciousness. Um, when we get into a state, if we're getting a massage or body work, we might dip into another state, that liminal state, or journeying, or um, even our consciousness shifts even when we're around different people. Like I can feel a shift in consciousness as you and I are interacting because there's an attunement between like our, I don't even know how to describe it, our energies or our consciousness, where we relate because we've had similar experiences. So it's almost like there's this realm that we're talking about that maybe is different, right? Um, so yeah, I want to say that too. This binary culture that we're typically, this duality, it's more than duality. It's like there's infinite layers of all of this stuff. And I think that's, as you were talking, that's what I was starting to see. It's like, it's not either or, it's like all these different layers that we can explore, that heart space and that a different kind of knowing. And as we kind of practice or welcome that in or welcome ourselves into those different spaces, we almost get a sense of a bigger world. And I don't mean a world like the physical world, but our consciousness starts to develop into an understanding of a world that's like way bigger than we ever thought was.
Beautiful. Everything you said resonates deeply with me. And I think when we start to shift from that kind of binary thinking that you were describing into the actuality and the possibility of multiplicity, the allness of it,
Mm.
I think that does bring us into, I think it is a different realm, actually. And even though what our physical experience, as it were, might be just the same, we're living in the same house, we're walking the same streets, whatever, we can be in very different places as we do that on different days. And
Yes.
I think when we enter into that heart space realm, or the realm of the sacred wildness, there is an aliveness to that which is really different, I think, to the binary world. There's a love and aliveness to that, which for me often brings spontaneous tears.
Hmm.
And being really, really, really moved by things in a way that in more everyday consciousness doesn't happen in quite the same way.
Yeah, because it feels like I'm a part of. I mean, if I'm relating to my experience of that, it's like, oh, I'm not outside of it. I'm a part of it. And when you said that multiplicity, it brought me back to the woods. Like that's where I feel most at home, like is when I'm hiking or out in the woods. And part of that is because there is so much diversity, if that makes sense. There's trees and there's ferns and there's flowers and there's like 50 different types of herbs and dead leaves and fresh buds. And I can hear the birds chirping and the squirrels rustling about and life.
Life, exactly. Yeah. I'm wondering about how, for anybody who's listening to this, who's just beginning to touch into this, he's had a few experiences of what we're talking about. What's your sense of how we might nurture our connection to the wild and sacred?
I think one of the ways is just getting quiet, and listening to the deepest parts of ourselves. And as I said a little bit ago, just really being curious about what those parts in ourselves are that want to be heard, the parts of us that have been silenced or that we feel like we've kind of put in a room because we feel like they're too much or not enough or whatever the story is in our consciousness. Um, and give them space, just honoring all those parts that we've maybe silenced because we thought they didn't fit into the constructs of this world, or maybe we were judging different parts of us. Um, so just making space to reflect and see, what have I silenced? I One of the practices that I do, I hold ecstatic dance journeys, and there's an aspect of ceremony in that. And one of the the things that I say is all parts of you are welcome here. So this is a place to express and to explore and to see what wants to be moved through you. It's an ecstatic dance journey with music. And afterwards, I encourage people, it might look like rolling on the floor or stomping your feet or yelling or shaking your body or tapping or punching the air, whatever is moved inside of you. And so often afterwards, I get feedback that people have felt more free than they've ever felt. This sense of like childlike play or expression, acceptance and freedom. And I feel like those are inherent. Those are things that we should feel free to express ourselves every day, not just in a container designed for that. Although the container is helpful to kind of encourage and nurture that out of people, it's a safe space for that. But ideally, we start to bring that out into the world um, and starting to question ourselves. Like, I mean, it could be as simple as, maybe you're waiting at the line in the grocery and you notice your shoulders are tense. So, you know, if you're functioning from the constructed self, you're like, oh, I'll just have to, just suffer through this. But if you're softening into that sacred wild self where you're honoring the truth of who you are and what you're experiencing in that moment, you're like, oh, I need to take a deep breath right now. And you can do that. Or maybe you need to like stretch your neck or reach your arms up and stretch your body. And if you're functioning from a place of, oh, that's not acceptable, you're holding back a part of yourself, but you're not hurting anybody by doing those things. So giving yourself space to kind of explore, what's it like when I do this? What's it like when I honor that part of myself that wants to take up space or do something outside of the norm, that's not hurting anyone else? And I think that's beneficial not only for ourselves, but for other people that we're around because it gives them permission to explore what they want to express and how they want to be in the world. So that's one of the things, making space. And I think, at least for me, another one is going out into nature. I like to hike, but also if, even if you're not a hiker, just sometimes I'll go to the park and I'll just lie a blanket down and I'll lie down on the earth and I'll just feel into my body and into the earth and listen and notice and almost like open up all my senses to feel what the earth feels like, how I'm supported, to allow my consciousness to kind of journey into the earth and think of all the creatures living in that earth, worms and bugs and, moles and whatnot, all those parts, rocks and um, mycelium. And listen to the creek, listen to the birds, listen to the wind, smell all the scents. I feel like that's one of the way that plants communicate with us is through scent. Flowers or, you notice it when you rub a piece of mint between your fingers. That's part of their communication with us. Um, so yeah, opening up and just listening to ourselves, listening to the earth, listening to the planet, listening to our hearts, and listening to the hearts of those we're in community with or in communication with, or our families, our friends, our neighbors.
So beautifully put. Thank you. I mean, that listening seems to me to be at the core of all of this, really. That kind of coming into relationship that you just described so perfectly, whether that's beginning to come into relationship with those parts of ourselves that have been separated out or judged or ignored, or they're coming into relationship with the earth in some way, and doing that from where we are, starting from the specificity of where and who we are. That to me seems such a gift, because that means we can do this anywhere. I live in the city, and so forests or coasts are not so easily available to me. And yet there can be a moment of, I mean, I was really smiling when you were talking about rubbing the mint between your fingers, because I have a little bit of mint and some thyme and some rosemary growing in my little back garden. And I often go out there and do exactly that, just rub them between my fingers and inhale. And so I think this being able to enter into this wild and sacred space is open to all of us, really. We're not talking about something that needs to be done under special conditions or needs special things. We don't need to have access to anything apart from ourselves in order to do this.
Agree. Agree. Yeah. And nature, I mean, I'm in the city as well. I have a park not too far from me that has trails and things. So there's like, it's kind of like, I say it saved my life a million times and I know it. I've walked all those trails and I feel like I'm a part of it. But even just going to a park, even if it's a little park, a place where there's no concrete or even envisioning what it was like beforehand. Do you ever do that?
Yeah, you mean envisioning what this area was like before it was built on?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I love doing that.
Yeah. I feel like that connects us too. Um, yeah. And I mean, for me, any big piece of nature, whether it's like a creek or a river or a mountain range or even just the sky, or even just going outside barefoot, right? Like there's a big, earthing, it's the science of that is interesting, or just walking and putting your hand on a tree. I feel like I mean, almost everybody has access to trees, and just putting your hand on the tree, I do that quite often. And I feel like if you practice it enough, I don't know, maybe even if you don't, it's like it'll tell you stories of like its life, like what it's lived through, even if it's a small tree, storms or rains or times when there was drought and it's not like it's in words, but it's like I don't know how that works. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I get that more with rocks. And and it isn't like I get that in words, but more of a sense. And obviously
Mhm.
rocks are so, so old. There's something about what they, I don't know what the word is, what they transmit or what they emit or emanate, that does carry in some way. Is there anything else you'd say about how we might nurture our connection with our wild sacredness?
I think play is another part of it. I mean, I could
Yeah.
there's so much I could say about it, but I think really just getting back to playing. Like, I'm an artist, and people are like, "Oh, I can't make art." I'm like, everybody can make art. It's just playing, or singing. Like, we all have a voice. People are like, "Oh, but I'm not singers." I feel like that's another part of the construct. We've created these forms of expression to be commodified. And so we think that only if you're quote unquote a good artist or a good singer can you do these things. But if we look back to ancient times, everyone would sing or make art or, and art was part of the everyday, whether it's baskets or pottery. We're creators, right? We'd create. And so, yeah, playing in that, not taking it too seriously, enjoying it, enjoying color, enjoying your voice. Um, Even if it's just like, feeling it. It's just, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. When you were talking earlier, I made a note of the word inhibited because
Mm,
it seems to me that so much of that construct, and especially what you just described about the commodification of creativity, is profoundly inhibiting.
uh-huh.
And and somehow I think when we come out of that, or at least when we start to connect with this sacred wildness, there's a there's a loosening of the inhibitions, and it isn't then that we're somehow out of control in some way, or that we violate boundaries or anything of that sort.
Mhm.
It's much more that there's the kind of freedom that you were talking about, that people describe from having been in the ecstatic dance space, that there's an okayness with whatever wants to express itself in the moment, be that sobbing or rage or coloring or making some kind of sound or music or movement, that we become less inhibited even within ourselves. So this is not necessarily about there being an audience or somebody else observing this, that we have a space within us where we can be ourselves in each moment without inhibiting ourselves in those ways.
Yes, yes. And I think the more we play and practice with becoming uninhibited and playing with whatever creativity or expression wants to move through us, the it's almost like the clearer the channel is, or we become, right? The clearer of a channel we become for that expression to move through us.
Yes, I think that's so important then, because it's not then saying this is something that we're doing.
Yes,
It's
yes,
about us being, as you just said, being the channel for something that wants to happen, that is coming through us. And I was going to bring this up, this sense that the wild sacredness wants us back. This is very much a two-way relationship. Yeah, can I just read you something, a poem that I wrote a few months ago, because it really speaks to this.
yes, please.
It's called Entirety. There is a wild and devastating love that cares only for our wholeness.
Mm,
It is loam and tears and all the things I thought love wasn't, and it has laid me bare, taken me apart, piece by tiny piece, and it was this that I always wanted. It will make you think you are losing your mind, and most probably your life too, but it has had enough of us sheltering in the shadows. This wild and devastating love will no longer stand for anything less than entirety.
oh, Fiona, that's so beautiful. Yes.
I was in that, obviously, when those words were coming. And I think there's something about acknowledging the power of that, of its wanting of us. You know, that this, like I was saying, is not about us becoming something in that sense, but about going back to the word remembering that the sacred wildness wants us back because we belong to it.
Yes. Yes. And there's almost like a calling, right? That's saying like, remember, remember. And your poem and what we're describing reminds me of that. Ananin quote, and the day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Because I almost feel like that calling of the sacred wild self, like you said, it is a two-way connection or a calling back and forth, but that calling, it creates an ache in us, right? An ache for that belonging, that remembering.
I think it's a deep, deep longing that we have in us for that. And I think the more separate or tamed or domesticated we've become, the deeper that ache
Yes,
is.
yes, I think you're right.
Central to the dark night. We talked last time about the falling apart and everything that goes with that. But I think that falling apart is really all in service to
Mhm.
what we're talking about now.
Yes,
That deep within that is this calling to return or to remember.
I agree.
And when we fall into that longing, I think when we let ourselves long as opposed to trying to fight or stop the longing, then we realize like, oh, all of that longing isn't wrong. I think the discovering of what the longing has been longing for then
Mhm.
makes sense of the whole process,
Yeah,
the whole journey.
I think so. Yeah, and yeah, once we kind of make that journey, it makes sense, but in the middle of it, sometimes it feels lonely or, um, but we have a bigger perspective, kind of once we climb up that mountain, we see, oh, that was part of the journey. That was what I needed to do in order to get here.
Yeah. Suzette, it's an absolute pleasure, such a joy to talk to you. And I know we could go on for hours. Is there anything it feels like we've left out or anything that comes to you to add or
I don't think so. I feel very complete. It's such a joy to speak with you, Fiona. I so enjoy it. The conversation, it's always so rich, and I feel such a great attunement between us. So I really appreciate you holding this space today.
thank you. My absolute pleasure. Bye now.
Bye bye.